In this exercise, we're going to show you how to get used to all the different options you have for editing ductwork once it's placed on the drawing. First thing you must do is open up your PractiCAD exercise template, as we've done here, and then go into the library icon on your PractiCAD ribbon. Make sure you go into the ductwork options and let's check all the same boxes. For options, we should make sure that check in-out attachment is checked. It's recommended that this is always checked. Allow incompatible connectors. It's recommended that this is always unchecked. So currently uncheck it. For duct line placement, it's recommended to have everything checked as we do here. Size read only is up to you. And to start, let's put our duct line editing options on change duct to transition, keep duct size at turn. I've got keep duct size at transition unchecked, and very important specification by geometry is checked. Though the first three are preferences, this one I think should be checked all the time. Once you've got everything all together, if you've made any changes, you'll see the save key pop up. Click save and then exit out of your library. Now we're going to zoom into this section of the drawing, and let's focus on this quadrant right here. Now first go into your workbox and choose a zone. We're going to choose a zone supply, and then we're going to choose a specification. I'm going to choose 2-inch water gauge. Remember that your specifications and zones might be different than that of this tutorial. So as long as you have 2 in the drop down menu, you should be fine. For this exercise, I'm going to grab 2-inch water gauge and say apply to new fittings. Now we need to go into the fitting box and grab a piece of rectangular duct. You should see the specifications, if you have them, already applied. We're going to go into within and choose 48 by 24. And then let's give it at a height 10-foot bottom and hit enter. Now we're going to place the duct on the drawing. Click once to start your rotation. Might help to have polar on. I'm going to turn polar tracking on. Click a second time to accept rotation, and then you should see the routing methods. And the last thing you see before you're one click away are the routing methods. So I'm going to click one more time. I'm currently routing with piece to put one piece on the drawing. So you could also hit P, spacebar to route with piece, and then click once, and your fitting should be on the drawing. Now first, to change the elevation of the entity, what we're going to do is just click on the entity, go over to your elevation box, and just change it to 15 foot, hit enter, and you would have successfully changed the elevation of that one entity. Now we're going to edit the duct in 2 ways. We can either do it from the edit fitting window, or we can do it from the AutoCAD property box. So let's do it from the AutoCAD property box. To start, either double click on your fitting. I'm going to do that now. Or you can right click and go to properties, and that'll open up your AutoCAD property box. Here, let's just change the geometry parameter. Change the width in to 36 and the depth in to 18. Now what we're going to do is go over to the fitting, and we're going to make changes to the connectors, but let's do this using the edit fitting option. Right click on the fitting after it's selected and go to your edit fitting option and check it. A little window should open up, and I'm going to put my fitting in Southwest isometric view by clicking right here. And you should have all your parameters unlocked. Let's take the connector out and switch it from TDF to slip and drive. On my computer it says S&D. Your data might be different. But let's just change the connector out to slip and drive. And let's lock down that parameter. Just that one parameter. And once you've done that, let's press OK. Now, go into your AutoCAD property box and try to change that connector from S&D back to what it was. I'm going to try to change it back to TDF. If you do it, you should see that it is impossible to change that connection. If we want to change that connection now, we need to go back into Edit Fitting. So once you've tried to change it and you've been unsuccessful, let's right-click on that fitting again and go into Edit Fitting. And then let's click on that connector, the connector out, and change it back to TDF or whatever connector you had it at first. And then press OK. As you can see, editing the fitting is very easy. Locking connections is also a very useful and easy feature to use. An area you might want to use edit fitting would be if you need to change a connection for some reason and you think you might edit the fitting later and you don't want that connection to change back. For example, let's go through an exercise where we're going to grab another piece of rectangular duct. Grab another piece of rectangular duct out of your fitting bin and then hit C spacebar for continue and place it on the drawing by clicking once, and then I'm going to hit escape to let go of the fitting. Now, let's click on the first fitting and then double click for the AutoCAD property box. Change the connection out to slip and drive, or some connector that you've got in your data, of course. Once you do that, you should see that PractiCAD will change the other connector to match. Now, this is all about the compatible connectors, and there's separate tutorials on that, and the fact that we have the option that doesn't allow us to attach connectors that are not compatible. So that's why we changed that for this exercise. Now, if we knew that we would want to hold these connections to slip and drive, even if we go to edit the duct later, we'd want to lock down these parameters. Currently, click on the first duct on the left and then change the parameter to 42 and hit enter. And when you do that, notice that PractiCAD has now reapplied the specifications that are active, and it's probably added a TDF connector back onto your fitting. So what we're going to do is we're going to now reapply specifications, but we're going to do it with the connector locked. So change that connector on the out back to slip and drive. And once you've done that, let's right click on that fitting and go to edit fitting. And let's lock the connector out down. And then let's press OK. And then hit escape to let go of the first fitting. And then click on the second fitting, right click, and go to edit fitting. And lock the connector in of that particular connector. So it's locked down to slip and drive. And press OK. Now what you're going to do is click on both fittings. Now before we edit anything here, I want to point out something that's very important. PractiCAD and AutoCAD both will only show you properties of identical items. It can show identical items that have different parameters, and you'll still see the list as you see here. For example, we have two fittings. They are identical in terms they're both rectangular duct fittings. So the entities are identical. But you can see that all the properties that they have the same, that are identical, show up in the property box. However, you can see that the connectors are different. The connector in and the connector out are different for each one. So whenever you've got two like items highlighted with properties that are different, Practicad shows the word varies. That's always an indicator that these properties are different. And you can globally edit in this section if you're highlighting two identical items. However, if you're highlighting two different items, for example, you're highlighting a tag and a piece of duct, these are two different entities. You can see that in the AutoCAD box it says all two. And notice that we don't have properties at all because property box will only show us the properties for one entity at a time. So if we want to edit the duct, we have to make sure just duct is highlighted. However, we can have two pieces of duct highlighted, and if they have parameters that are the same, it will show the property box. But if the parameters values are not the same, it's going to say the word varies. So it's an important note. Once you've got two fittings highlighted again, let's go back to our specification table and let's change the spec. I'm going to say to 6-inch water gauge and say apply new spec to current selection. And we're going to press OK. And once you do that, pay attention to the change. You should notice that when you do this, nothing should change because the connection should stay the same because we locked those connections down. However, you can see by going into the workbox that we have changed the specification. You can also see by going into technology parameters that specification is 6-inch water gauge. So let's do the same thing, but let's undo those connections. Let's right click and edit fitting on both. Connector out, we're going to unlock, press OK. And then we're going to click on this, right click, edit fitting, and change it. Notice that I can only use the edit fitting for one item at a time. Now we're going to highlight the duct again. Let's go back to the specification, and I'm going to go back to 2-inch water gauge and say apply to current selection, OK. And you can see it's added those connections and edit them back to where they are. Once we've done that and we've gotten used to the exercise and using the locks and editing through the properties box and the elevation and the edit fitting window, let's go over the fabrication level. Just delete one piece of duct. Then double click on it and make sure that you've got the AutoCAD property box open. And take note of the fabrication level stating that it's label only. If it's label only, you should notice when you go to change connector to S and drive, it should adjust the length as it's done here in this exercise in my screen. I'm now going to change the connector out to S and drive as well. And notice that it changes the length to 59. Whenever you're in label only, it should do this. It should always adjust the finished length to match the connectors. Notice if you now go into length, change it to 48 and hit enter, you should see the fabrication level switch to cut and label. And that's because this piece is no longer going to fit the coil line. It's no longer a stock size fitting. So now it's going to go to the plasma cutter and therefore it's going to say cut and label. If you switch this back, and let's change it back to label only right now, you'll notice the fitting goes back to a full size fitting that's going to match the default stock options you have in your ductwork options in my library. And there are tutorials on that. Okay, that's going to conclude the first portion of our duct line editing exercise on single fittings.